Today, we are going to crack open a really powerful learning framework. It's all about uncovering how experts really think so you can learn to do the exact same thing.
So, let me ask you something. Have you ever been there? You cram for a test, you ace the exam, but then when you try to actually use that knowledge in the real world, you just draw a blank. It's this weird feeling, sometimes called the illusion of competence, and it actually points to a huge problem in the way we usually learn things. And the root of that problem is what we can call the expert's invisible mind. See, it's the massive gap between knowing what an expert knows and understanding how that expert actually thinks to get to those conclusions. Okay, think about it like this. Back in the day, if you were a carpenter's apprentice, the whole process was right there in front of you. It was visible. You could see the hands, the tools, the techniques. But in a modern classroom, the most important part, the problem solving, the strategizing that's going on inside an expert's head, is a total black box. We never get to see it. And what does that lead to? Well, it leads to this really frustrating thing called inert knowledge. That's information that's just stuck. We can remember it for tests, sure, but we can't actually use it to solve a new problem. Why? Because we only learn the final answer, not the messy, brilliant process that an expert used to get there. So here it is, the core challenge we're facing. How in the world do we crack open that black box? How do we see the gears turning inside an expert's mind so we can learn the how and not just the what? Well, the answer comes from an approach that kind of blends the best of that old school apprenticeship with what we need for modern learning. It's a method that is laser focused on one thing, making thinking visible. It's called cognitive apprenticeship, and the goal is actually pretty simple, but it's also revolutionary. It's to take all those hidden mental steps an expert goes through and make them observable, so that someone learning can watch, imitate, practice, and eventually make those skills their own. And it works through this really clear, structured process. First, the expert models their thinking out loud. Then, they coach the learner, providing what's called scaffolding. Think of them like training wheels on a bike to help them along. And finally, and this part is crucial, they start fading out that support bit by bit until the learner can do it all by themselves. Okay, so that's the theory, but what's really amazing is seeing how this plays out in the real world. Let's take a look at a pretty famous study in education. The method is called reciprocal teaching. It was specifically designed to help students who, could read all the words on a page just fine, but they really struggled to understand what the text actually meant. This quote is a perfect example of that coaching phase. Notice the teacher isn't just giving the right answer. They're modeling how an expert reader thinks, by summarizing, by questioning, and then gently guiding the student to do the same thing. They are making the invisible act of understanding a text totally visible. And the results? They were absolutely stunning. In these studies, students' scores on comprehension tests literally doubled. They jumped from an average of 40% all the way up to 80%. That's just a massive testament to what happens when you don't just teach facts, you teach the thinking process itself. So, cognitive apprenticeship is really all about getting a peek at an expert's mental models. So let's dive into one of the most powerful mental models out there, thinking from first principles.
Elon Musk is probably the most famous user of this approach. Instead of reasoning by analogy, which is just saying, well, we'll do this because it's kind of like something else we've done, he breaks a problem all the way down to its most basic, fundamental truths.
Right, so when he was looking at the problem of ridiculously expensive rockets, the analogy approach would have been to just try and make the current designs a little bit cheaper. But Musk completely rejected that. He asked a much, much more basic question. He just boiled the entire problem down to its absolute essence. What are the fundamental materials in a rocket? And when he priced out those raw materials, he had this incredible insight. Their total cost was only 2% of the final price tag of a rocket. And that changed everything. The high cost wasn't a law of physics. It was just a result of how things had always been done. He made an invisible assumption visible. And in that process, he created SpaceX. So this is all fascinating stuff, right? But how can we actually use this kind of thinking in our own lives? Let's talk about a practical tool you can put in your own learning toolkit and start using today. You can basically become your own apprentice by using a technique like the SQ3R method. It's a system for reading and studying that forces you to make your own thinking process visible to yourself, just like an expert would in cognitive apprenticeship. It's a simple 5-step loop. First, you survey the material to get the big picture. Then you turn the headings into questions to get your brain engaged.
Then you read actively, looking for the answers. Afterwards, you recite the main points to make sure you actually understood it. And finally, you review it all to lock it into your memory. Every single step forces you to think deliberately and fights back against that illusion of competence.
And that really brings us to our final thought. The big idea here is that the most important skills, whether it's in business or art or science, are often the invisible ones. They're the mental cheat codes that experts use but almost never explain out loud. So the question I want to leave you with is this. What is an invisible process in your world that if you could just see it, would change absolutely everything?